all that seems wrong with freedom, liberty, democracy, and the ideals of human rights in the world today. Even though I have read and listened a lot to clever and insightful people, I seem confused, like so many else out there, about what is going on with the world and the free world, especially. And is the mask of the non liberty behind the face of liberty really unmasking? And why are there people talking against it, like the NRX movement, and in other parts of the world not really wanting to have it, but just wanting to compromise for the sake of the power that's behind it, that's forcing its will on these parts of the world that does really don't want to go that way? And why are some people even in prison because they have opinions against what they see the false face of liberty and freedom? And why are there nations who are even practicing against it and actually using power in order to limit or stop or take away this idea, or maybe not even educate people in it? It's very confusing because things should be clear, but in our world of today, it is really not easy to understand. As an ideal, it can be straightforward. It's the freedom to be who you are, say your meaning without fear, have the religion and faith that you believe in, and at the same time be a citizen who is equal to the law and have your basic human rights with you at all times, protected from persecution, and able to work and gain in the same society that you are maybe criticizing or not sharing the belief or the views of totally. So, this is the basic idea. Come to this place, or you who are yearning for freedom, and come to the mother of freedom and the goddess of freedom. But what's happened to all that in the name of freedom, as many out there in the world maybe would put forward in their stories, both personally and as states and nations? And you can hear from different parts of the world. Of course, it's not promoted because it doesn't fit the narrative, but it is in different parts of the world something that's maybe more well known and well understood, that when persons are seeking their liberty and seeking their freedom, they are at the same time losing something. Or maybe this freedom is distorted and misunderstood. That's how they put it. That it's a certain kind of freedom, freedom to go wild, drink yourself to death, destroy your own life, go ahead and do things that's not useful. You can be free to do all that, as long as you are not free to truly get to the points that really can unmask the people who are running the masquerade behind the line, using the resources and power of the people in the free countries, and letting them live on that idea of freedom that is not true. Like that is the propaganda and the story put forward against basically the West as a whole, and especially the far West. And is there some truth in that or no? At the same time, you can see in the East and parts of other places in the world, like Africa, that you can have a lot of trouble having your freedom if you are opposed to any kind of ruler or leader or something, or anybody who's in control. So at any time you compare between these two places to be, you would say, at least in the West, I can go about having my freedom, and okay, why should I stick my nose in what doesn't belong to me? Maybe it's not totally free and equal as the ideal takes it, but at least they are aware of not persecuting people and making their life somehow secure. And so we see that there is a lot of problematic issues surrounding the understanding of freedom. And some says that these countries that are promoting freedom are using it as a way of a hidden imperialist agenda to get into those countries, steal their resources, or get influence on their politics, and change their societies towards the notion that they want them to, and bring them away from their either traditions, background, ideals, or the other countries whom they would have been allied with. Many would say from those parts of the world that it's like when the Christians came with Vasco da Gama, Columbus, and the other invaders of Central America, and had Christianity with them to convert these people of nature. And maybe their intentions were good, but it was certainly used politically to gain the gold and the land and the power over there, and to bring these people into a new religion as subordinates and not as equals. And you can say that they can point finger to the revolution in America and the Civil War, where the people were set free, but only after a very harsh and difficult war, because they were part of the economy, and suddenly somebody used it against that, and it became not the question of giving the blacks their liberty, but the question of how can it be used to win or lose. And so they say this is a false doctrine we are living under, and it's used against us. But when you look back and you see the Western societies and countries, you can feel that there is a sense of liberty that is very strong, and that people really and truly feel they have some kind of peace with their governments because of that liberty, until something goes wrong and they go to the streets and they face the cannons of water and shooting police and so on. So how far does this liberty really go? And what about the transparency of this liberty? Can you really go and change politics? Or can you interfere in how they are run if they are wrong? Is it so easy to climb the ladder to get into parliaments and to be part of the ruling system? Or does it need a lot of money, and that money is in the hands of oligarchs and rich people and people with power, and so they will ensure that things stay that way by helping people to power in the name of the people, so they could ensure their riches and ways of being. And that's what made these people from the NRX movement lately, these last years, I was very thrilled to read, and in a way also perplexed and confused, reading about their program in changing the politics and in a way getting rid of democracy, because they say with their own understanding that it has just become a facade and that people can see through it and should see more through it, and so that God will fall, and the face of that false God of democracy and participation and liberty and securing your rights, it's not really there. It's a smokescreen, or just something that the people are holding on to because that's the last straw of liberty in that box of ideals they have been facing. And so, is liberty really an option, and what kind of liberty? And it can sometimes also be chaotic and lead nations to be divided and misunderstood and not really gather on a right cause. So the idea of freedom and liberty is not always healthy, especially if it is like going in ways that, well, it can be destructive to society, or giving place to anarchy or foreign powers to lead and dominate. So that's the argument against. And that's why even those who proclaim liberty and freedom, they have the need, and they must, behind the lines, keep tight control. And that's what several officials did in the last century. One of the most famous were the very strong and popular but also discussed leader Edgar Hoover, whom I have seen a lot of documentaries on, and also understood in several ways that he was fighting for what he believed in, to preserve that idea of liberty and idea of freedom in his own country because it was being used as a tool by people who don't believe in it and they want to change society in the name of freedom. And that's what can be happening in the West in these years. And it doesn't need to be foreign powers, it can sometimes be powers from the elite, people who have lost the belief in the people and seeing them as a gray, low IQ mass who really can't follow, understand, or dig into deep into anything. And so their votes becomes unproductive and maybe taking the country in wrong hands. And to prevent that, they have to put out some very popular figures and make sure they go in the right directions anyhow, and people can get some of they want. They would have gotten it anyway. And so it's just a feeling of being free that is reserved in the people, that I'm voting. I can go and criticize, I can put my opinion in the newspaper, but really I'm getting the same things that I would have gotten if I was under a king or a tyrant or any kind of rule, because they want to secure that people have enough so they do not make uprisings. That's the basic idea of like being complex and being also confused about liberty whenever it's put forward by people and talked about. And my mind takes me in all directions sometimes. I love the idea and I'm glad I'm living in Western societies where I have this liberty, like now, sitting recording this. But at the same time, would that liberty also be good or useful in the hands of people who will use it destructively? And what do you do about it then? Won't you try to limit it or stop it or avoid having it have this destructive consequences? And that's the same to be said about what's going on in the East. These strong leaders who see the opposition maybe fueled by some foreign countries or strange ideas, they want to stop it because it's not on the same level of what they want and the same values. It doesn't share the same values of what they want the people to live under, and the people have given them the power to execute. So if you have a theocracy or you have a kind of a communist system or oligarchic system, and the people are not really protesting it, not just because they are afraid of the police, but because they say, this is how the world works. I do not need more freedom than being able to go and sit in the cafe and talk and laugh and see a few programs and have a family. And what more freedom am I yearning for? To go in the streets and disturbing the peace and destroying shops? That's anarchy. That's not useful. And protesting the leader, well, they are protesting in the West, and how much does that help? Are they really toppling their leaders or the people behind the power? Or is it just, oh, that guy failed, big nose, out with him, get a new one, and the politics and the policy goes on? And that has been seen more and more. And so these people in the East, especially East Europe, has been revising some of these thoughts, as I have read in some articles and background reports and some documentaries that have been there trying to figure out where the people are leaning. And a lot of them has apparently the need for democracy and to vote and change governments, but there is also many who just support the strong, stable, traditional leader who would keep the country safe, give limited freedoms, but secure everything else, and maybe people will have some peace and prosperity more than they would have had if they are always toppling each other and crying and shouting in the parliaments and not agreeing on anything. So maybe that model of freedom that came from the West, Scandinavia maybe, or the United States especially, and has been exported to many places in the world, is not holding any longer. And it's like a mask that is fallen from the faces of people who say, let's go back to our own ways. And we can see it's working in some other places in the world. Big empires are leading maybe a kind of democratic name, but everybody knows it's a kind of elite rule, the bureaucrat rule, the rule of the chosen people, the chosen leaders. And that's how it goes and will go in whatever system we are trying to uphold. So maybe it's just an illusion and utopia, and then people are more realistic than we think, saying, I don't want this and I can't fight for something that's not really gonna help me. At the same time, we can see people truly fighting for freedom, like people sitting in prisons and people who want to say their meaning and opposition to rulers, and the rulers are too quick to quarrel with them and put them in jail or torture them, even, really not respecting their human rights or their ideas or thoughts, and not taking them into consideration but excluding them. And that happens also many places in the world, where simple freedoms are taken away from people in the name of security and in the name of the values of society and in the name of the right way of doing things. And so these people are yearning for a little bit more freedom. That's why when they look to the West and see it's faltering, and maybe that goddess is not really shining through anymore, and that the big troubles of freedom are very much closer to home, well, maybe the light is extinguishing and going out, and we all have to look to something else. And that's why when I've been presenting some of the thoughts of the idea of freedom and righteousness in the book of a humanist thinker, I saw that the idea of the wise counsel on behalf of the people, but still the people who can share and openly have their ideas met, could be maybe also a way of meeting the demands of people without just having everything changing overnight to some sort of so-called democracy that's really not a democracy, and democracy that really fails, and thereby, as Plato says, leads to oligarchy and leads to tyranny, because people cannot live like that, quarreling and having trouble having a central rule, and so somebody takes over, crushes the opposition and opponents, and gets the support, and things go on from there in a very tyrannical manner, worse than they started. So the call for liberty has sometimes brought with it the solution of tyranny. And so maybe people should be looking at different forms and values, forms of leadership and forms of government. We can see that kingdomship are very stable. I have seen a lot of places where, like, not seen, but I've like looked into some of their country histories and politics, and they seem very much more stable than many of the other places where people doesn't have the monarchies, and especially if it is monarchies that are caring for the people and righteous in their government and using those five basic values of rule I talked about in another place, that they should look to the minorities and then see how they can protect their basic rights and needs, and nobody violating them. The second one is to look to the economy and how it is, how the richness of the country, the resources, and that the riches are not gone to a very small group while the most majority are poor. So that distribution of wealth is somehow according to a basic level of inclusion for everyone, economic inclusion for everyone. And the third is how they go about their righteousness in the laws, the basic juridical system, and how it works equal for everyone. And the effect of that will bring a lot of stability to society, because people will with time understand that it is actually basically both the close relatives of the leader or ruler or ruling group and the people out in the field in the cold who are treated equally. And maybe there are harsh rules for people in power, more harsh than they are for people outside power. That gives that sense of balance. And the majority has no right to misuse its power over the minority. still the minority do not have the rights to go into open revolt or try to agitate for their rules against society. So their freedoms will be limited in some way, but it will keep society in check and balance, and the leaders more safe in treating everyone. And the fourth one would be to bring prosperity by educating people, using the human resources, the lands, distributing them, giving space for motivation to people, to lead the land, to work things out, to be inventors, and all what's needed in order to prosper. And the last one is to look how they face criticism. And this is where liberty really kicks in and freedoms can be used. And a wise and clever king and leader will let the people have their ways of speaking, but not their ways of destructive speaking. So it would be a constructive way of letting the freedoms being used and in according to what society has the need for. So it's not freedom on all costs just because you want the freedom. We don't go out of our houses and apartments and shops shouting and what can you say, toileting on the streets or doing stuff that's not needed just because you have the freedom to. You do it when there is something wrong, like a fire or so. So this is the basic idea that I think has to be revised somehow. And I know clever people will understand this, but the problem is when you are facing, like many of these politicians, poor people, poor guys. I once dreamt of being a politician, but I'm happy I didn't become one. They always have to say words very slowly, very quickly, and very easily. So the most low IQ dominator can understand they are talking about liberty and talking about freedoms or whatever they're talking about. And that doesn't work and doesn't hold. People has also to accept their limits and that they cannot share in their ideas and power and everything. There could be some people who are cleverer and maybe they can confer with them, but that everyone has the same and equal way of speaking and talking, that's not liberty and democracy as in a useful way. This is more a chaotic herd of people, or everyone talking, everyone reacting, everyone listening to his own voice. That's where we are now. And that's why we are going very, very fast into some kind of tyranny, single party rule, and rich people overtaking the whole system because it's faltering and falls from inside. And the voice of the wise, like in the United States, that guy, the old man who has been speaking for many decades on a third way in democracy and criticizing the system, and he has to be there. He's a guarantee that there is always somebody to say to Caesar or whoever, stop, where are you going? You are only human, remember that. And that's what's going wrong in the East. As soon as they get rid of the freedoms and the basic rights, well, it's easy. The leader goes on until he steps up and up and up until he falls in one turn down and is toppled, if they can topple him, before he kills half the population. So this is crazy. We are between some kind of pseudo-reality of freedom and liberty and strange, psychotic and sadistic reality of what can we call it? Dictatorship and forced rule without any space for participation. And in that case, most of the clever voices are really being silent. You cannot speak in those times. And the clever and the wise is put out of function because it's the herds and the ones who shouts louder, or the most clever who can gain his own interest on behalf of himself and the people around him. And despite all the people's screaming and shouting, and can get through with what he or she wants, if they do so, until somebody else comes and topple them, and then they they try to maintain the new rule and go the same corrupt way, because power will corrupt when there is no opposition, nothing to be afraid of. So things are really a mess, I think, and I believe it's very, very tiring to be in such a state where you do not really believe in freedom and democracy is working, and at the same time you can see that this is the last straw we are all holding on to, and what will go on with us without it. And many people are lacking it, and it's at the same time leading people just as quickly into the hands of some kind of understandable system that they know from their history, traditions, or whatever they believe can give the society security. All right, talk, and at the same time confusion, but whatever, I can as well scream my thoughts out there as I'm screaming them in my own head sometimes, because what to do? And then you just go silent because you cannot really change or do anything about it, not for the moment. Hello there, Statue of Liberty.